My fiancée demanded. Get on your knees and beg for my forgiveness. I agreed. In front of her friends, I got on one knee and said, I beg you to tell them about the $35,000 debt you've been hiding from me. Begging for the truth. I, 32M, never thought I'd be the kind of guy who'd end his engagement in front of an audience. But life has a way of forcing your hand when you least expect it. The whole thing started unraveling 3 weeks before our wedding. We'd been together for 4 years, engaged for 8 months, and I genuinely believed I knew everything about the woman I was going to marry. We talked about finances, career goals, family planning, all the big stuff couples are supposed to discuss before tying the knot. She worked in marketing at a tech startup, made decent money, and always seemed responsible with her spending. We'd agreed to keep our finances mostly separate until after the wedding, then gradually merge everything once we were married. Looking back now, that separation should have been my first red flag. The discovery happened on a Tuesday evening. I was at her apartment helping her sort through wedding RSVPs when her laptop chimed with an email notification. She was in the shower, and the screen was facing me as I sat on the couch. I wasn't trying to snoop. The preview just appeared right there on the desktop notification. It was from a collections agency, and the subject line mentioned an outstanding balance and final notice before legal action. My stomach dropped. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe it was a billing error or something she'd already taken care of. But doubt crept in fast. I didn't open her email or anything like that, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. When she came out of the bathroom, I asked her about it casually, mentioning that I'd seen the notification and wanted to make sure everything was okay. Her face went pale for just a second before she recovered with a smile. She told me it was nothing, just a gym membership she'd forgotten to cancel months ago, and they were being dramatic about a small, unpaid balance. She said she'd handle it in the morning and not to worry about it. The way she dismissed it so quickly made my unease grow stronger, but I let it go for the moment. That night, I couldn't sleep. Something in her reaction felt off, too practiced, too smooth. The next morning, after she left for work, I did something I'm not proud of but felt necessary. I checked the mail that had been piling up on her kitchen counter, stuff she hadn't opened yet. Mixed in with wedding vendor invoices and bridal magazines were 3 separate letters from collections agencies, all marked urgent. I didn't open them, but I took photos of the return addresses. Then I went home and spent the next 2 days doing research. I called the collections agencies, pretending to be following up on accounts. I checked public records. I even pulled my own credit report to make sure nothing had been opened in my name. What I discovered made me physically sick. She had accumulated over $35,000 in debt over the past 18 months. Credit cards, personal loans, even a payday loan that charged an insane interest rate. None of it was for anything substantial. No medical emergency, no family crisis, nothing that would justify that kind of borrowing. From what I could piece together, it was shopping, dining out, trips with her friends, and maintaining a lifestyle she couldn't actually afford. The worst part was that she'd been lying to me about all of it. We'd been planning this wedding together, splitting costs down the middle, and the whole time she was drowning in debt she'd never mentioned. We'd had multiple conversations about our financial situation before getting married. I'd shared everything with her, my salary, my savings, my student loans that I was almost done paying off, my retirement accounts. She'd shown me pay stubs and told me she had about $15,000 in savings and no significant debt. All lies. I spent a day processing this information, trying to figure out how to approach it. Part of me wanted to confront her immediately, but another part wanted to understand the full scope first. I reached out to a buddy who works in financial planning and explained the situation hypothetically. He told me that this level of hidden debt before marriage was a massive red flag, not just financially, but in terms of trust and honesty. He suggested having a serious conversation and possibly postponing the wedding until things were sorted out. That Friday, I decided to talk to her. I'd planned it out carefully. I'd show her what I'd found, tell her I wasn't angry but concerned, and suggest we work through it together before getting married. I wanted to give her a chance to explain, to come clean, to show me that despite the lies, we could still fix this. I showed up at her apartment that evening with printouts of the collection notices and account information I'd been able to gather. Before I could even start the conversation, she went on the offensive. She said I'd been distant all week and demanded to know what was wrong with me. I told her we needed to talk about something serious, and I pulled out the documents. Her reaction wasn't what I expected. Instead of shame or apology or even defensive explanation, she exploded with anger. She accused me of invading her privacy, going through her mail, stalking her financial records. She said I had no right to dig into her personal business, and that what she did with her money before we got married was none of my concern. When I tried to point out that hiding this kind of debt absolutely was my concern since we were about to legally bind our lives together, she doubled down. She told me I was being controlling and paranoid. She said the debt wasn't that bad and she had a plan to pay it off, though she refused to share what that plan was. When I asked why she'd lied about it during all our financial discussions, she said she didn't lie. She just didn't think it was relevant yet. The circular logic was maddening. The argument escalated quickly. I told her I thought we should postpone the wedding until we could work through this honestly and maybe see a financial counselor together. She took that as me calling off the wedding entirely and lost it. She started crying, then yelling, then crying again. She said I was abandoning her over money, that I clearly didn't love her enough to stick with her through hard times, that I was just like every other guy who'd let her down. I tried to stay calm and rational. I explained that this wasn't about the money itself. I would have helped her if she'd been honest. It was about the lying, the hiding, the fact that she'd looked me in the eye multiple times and deliberately deceived me about something this important. I told her trust was the foundation of marriage, and she'd just shattered mine. She wasn't hearing any of it. Eventually, she told me to get out. I left. Over the weekend, she blew up my phone with texts alternating between apologetic and angry. One message would be her saying she was sorry and wanted to talk things through. The next would be her calling me judgmental and accusing me of never really loving her. I didn't respond to any of them. I needed space to think. By Monday, I'd made my decision. I couldn't marry someone who'd lied to me this extensively about something this important. The debt itself was manageable. We could have worked through it together. But the deception, the gaslighting when I'd confronted her, the refusal to take any real accountability, that was the deal breaker. I called her and told her I wanted to meet and talk. She agreed immediately, sounding hopeful that I was coming around. She suggested we meet at this wine bar where her friend group was having their regular Monday evening hangout. She said it would be good to be around supportive people while we work things out. I should have known something was off about that suggestion, but I was too drained to care. I agreed. When I arrived at the wine bar, I found her sitting at a large table with 6 of her closest friends. They all looked at me with these sympathetic, knowing expressions. Clearly, she'd already told them her version of events. I felt ambushed, but I stayed. She stood up when she saw me and walked over. In front of all her friends, she told me she was glad I'd come to my senses. She said she knew I'd realize I was being unreasonable and that we could move past this. Then she said the words that sealed everything. She told me to get on my knees and beg for her forgiveness. She said if I really loved her and wanted to save our relationship, I needed to show her friends and everyone present that I was sorry for invading her privacy and trying to control her life. She wanted a public apology, a public display of contrition, so she could feel confident I wouldn't pull something like this again. Her friends were all watching with these expectant faces. I could see a couple of them filming on their phones, probably ready to capture my humiliating apology for social media. The whole setup was designed to put me in my place, to make me the villain in her story, to force me to accept blame for her lies. Something clicked in that moment. The manipulation, the audience, the performance of it all, it was so perfectly calculated. I realized this was who she really was. Not the person I'd fallen in love with, but someone who'd been playing a role for 4 years, and when that role was threatened, her real character emerged. I looked at her standing there with her arms crossed, waiting for me to humiliate myself, and I made a split-second decision. I told her I agreed. I would get on my knees. Her face lit up with vindication. Her friends pulled out their phones, ready to record. She was already starting to smile, probably imagining how magnanimous she'd look accepting my apology. I got down on one knee, looked up at her, and told her I was begging her to do something. The smile faltered on her face. I said I was begging her to tell everyone present about the $35,000 in debt she'd been hiding from me. I begged her to explain to her friends why she'd lied to me repeatedly about her financial situation. I begged her to share with this audience how she'd tried to gaslight me when I'd discovered the truth. The silence that followed was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop in that bar. Her face went from confused to pale to bright red in about 3 seconds. Her friends' phones were still up, still recording, but now they were capturing something very different from what they'd expected. She started stammering, trying to form words. One of her friends asked what I was talking about. Another asked if it was true. I stayed on one knee and pulled out my phone, showing the collection notices and account statements I'd photographed. I passed my phone around the table so her friends could see the evidence. She tried to snatch the phone away, but her friend had already started reading. The friend's expression changed from supportive to shocked. She handed the phone to the next person, and the wave of realization moved around the table. My ex-fiancée started crying and saying I was humiliating her, that this was private, that I had no right to share this information with her friends. I stood up and told her she'd invited me here specifically to humiliate me in front of these same people, so I figured turnabout was fair play. I said if she wanted a public spectacle, she got one, just not the one she'd planned. One of her friends asked her directly if this was all true. My ex tried to explain that it was more complicated than it looked, that I was exaggerating, that some of those debts weren't even real. But her explanations were falling apart under the weight of documented evidence. Another friend pointed out that my ex had recently bought a new designer handbag and had posted about it on social media. Apparently, that friend had thought it was weird given that my ex was supposedly saving for the wedding. The facade was crumbling in real time. More questions came. How long had she been hiding this? Did she have a plan to pay it back? Why would she lie to someone she was about to marry? My ex kept trying to redirect blame to me for snooping and violating her privacy, but her friends weren't buying it anymore. A couple of them looked genuinely concerned, asking if she needed help or if there was something else going on. I told the group I genuinely wanted to help her if she'd been honest, but instead she'd lied and then tried to manipulate me into public humiliation when I discovered the truth. I said I deserved better than that, and I hoped they could see why I couldn't marry someone who deceived me this way. Then I took my phone back, told my ex the engagement was over, and walked out. Behind me, I could hear her crying and her friends trying to comfort her while also clearly questioning what they'd just witnessed. The next few days were chaos. She called and texted constantly, alternating between begging me to reconsider and threatening to sue me for defamation. Her friends started reaching out too, some to get my side of the story, others to defend her and tell me I'd gone too far. I blocked most of them. The ones who seemed genuinely concerned, I explained the situation more fully. A few of them admitted they'd suspected she had money problems, but didn't realize the extent. My own friends and family were shocked when I told them the engagement was off. My parents had really liked her, and it was hard explaining that the person they'd gotten to know wasn't entirely real. But when I showed them the evidence and described what had happened at the wine bar, they understood. My dad told me I'd dodged a bullet, and my mom said she was proud of me for standing up for myself even when it was hard. Canceling the wedding was a nightmare. We lost deposits on the venue, the caterer, the photographer. I had to contact all our guests and explain that the wedding was off without going into too much detail. Some people pressed for information, but I kept it vague, just said we'd discovered we weren't compatible and had decided to part ways. The financial loss stung, but not as much as marrying someone who'd been lying to me would have. The story spread through our social circles quickly. Apparently, one of her friends had actually recorded part of my revelation at the wine bar, and it got shared around. My ex was furious about that, claiming it violated her privacy, but several mutual friends pointed out that she'd set up the situation specifically to record my humiliation, so she couldn't complain when the recording showed something else instead. About a week after everything exploded, one of her closer friends contacted me privately. This friend had apparently known about some of the debt, but not all of it. She told me my ex had been living beyond her means for years, trying to keep up appearances with their social group. The friend said my ex had always been competitive and image-conscious, and when we'd gotten engaged, she'd felt pressure to have the perfect wedding, the perfect dress, the perfect everything, regardless of cost. The friend apologized for not saying something sooner and said she understood why I'd ended things. That conversation actually helped me feel better about my decision. It confirmed what I'd started to suspect, that the person I'd been engaged to had been more concerned with appearances and keeping up with others than with building an honest partnership with me. The debt was just a symptom of deeper issues around honesty, values, and what she really prioritized in life. A month later, I was still processing everything. I'd moved on with the practical stuff. I'd gotten my ring back and sold it. I'd changed my emergency contacts and beneficiaries. I'd deep cleaned my apartment to remove all traces of her. But emotionally, I was still unpacking the betrayal. It wasn't just about the money or even the lies. It was about realizing I'd spent 4 years with someone I didn't actually know. I started seeing a therapist to work through it. She helped me understand that I'd done nothing wrong by verifying my concerns about the collection's notices, and that my ex's attempt to flip the script and make me the villain was classic manipulation. The therapist also helped me recognize patterns I'd overlooked during the relationship, small lies and omissions that I'd dismissed at the time, but that now seemed like warnings I'd missed. The therapy sessions revealed something else too. I'd been so focused on being the good guy in the relationship, understanding, supportive, non-judgmental, that I'd sometimes ignored my own gut instincts when something felt off. I convinced myself I was being paranoid or overly critical when really I was picking up on legitimate red flags. Learning to trust my own judgment again became part of the healing process. My ex tried to reach out several more times over the following weeks. She sent long emails explaining her side, claiming the debt happened because of circumstances beyond her control, promising she'd get help and fix everything if I'd just give her another chance. But the explanations kept changing. First it was unexpected expenses, then it was helping family members, then it was investments that didn't pan out. The inconsistencies just reinforced that I'd made the right choice. Eventually, I heard through mutual friends that she'd moved back to her hometown to live with her parents while she sorted out her finances. Apparently, the debt had gotten even worse than what I'd discovered, closer to $50,000 once everything came to light. Her parents were helping her consolidate and pay it down, but it would take years. Part of me felt bad for her situation, but mostly I just felt relieved I wasn't legally tied to that financial mess. 3 months after everything ended, I ran into one of her friends at a coffee shop. This was someone who'd been at the wine bar that night, but hadn't taken sides in the aftermath. She told me something that gave me a strange sense of closure. She said my ex had been planning to quit her job after the wedding because she assumed I'd be okay supporting both of us for a while since I made more money. The friend said my ex had never told me this plan because she knew I wouldn't agree to it, but she'd been counting on it being harder for me to say no once we were married. That revelation crystallized everything. The hidden debt, the lies, the manipulation, it had all been part of a larger pattern of deception about what she really wanted from the marriage. She hadn't been looking for a partner. She'd been looking for a safety net. Someone to bail her out of her financial problems and fund the lifestyle she wanted to maintain. Hearing that made me angry all over again, but it also made me grateful. Grateful that I'd found those collection notices. Grateful that she'd pushed for that public confrontation. Grateful that I'd had the presence of mind to turn her manipulation back on her and expose the truth. If none of that had happened, I might be married right now to someone who was using me, and I might not have discovered it until we were legally bound and possibly had kids. Looking back on that moment in the wine bar, getting down on one knee and begging for the truth instead of begging for forgiveness, it was the best decision I made in the whole relationship. It gave me my life back. It saved me from years of financial burden and emotional manipulation. It showed me what I actually deserved in a partner: honesty, respect, genuine partnership. Sometimes the hardest thing and the right thing are the same thing. Standing up for yourself when someone's trying to humiliate you into submission isn't easy, especially in front of an audience. But it's necessary. Nobody should have to beg for forgiveness when they've done nothing wrong. And sometimes, the only thing worth begging for is the truth, because without that, you don't have a relationship at all. You just have a performance, and eventually, every performance ends.